Hey everybody, my name is David. This is 2022, my first video of this year, and I'm super excited because I've got a really action-packed year planned for you guys. Today what we're going to talk about is a little bit of Power Automate, because the reason is when you're dealing with Canvas apps, you can call extra functionality inside of a Power Automate flow, and in addition to that, when you're using, say, these chatbots, down under, chatbot, they also use Power Automate to make calls to look up stuff that the chatbot may need to get from people. So in all of those examples, I want to make sure that at least everybody's got a good solid understanding of the intermediate nuance issues that come up with Power Automate. So that's really what this video is about. Also, real quick, just to let you know the series that I'll be putting together for this year in 2022, I'm going to try to do up to 3 of them. So the first one is going to be App in a Day. This is typically a workshop that's out there. A lot of other videos exist out there, but I want to do one and put my little spin or flair on it. And then also what I want to do is I want to do a Power Virtual Agent in a Day workshop. And then I'm looking into, I see the files to do it, maybe Dashboard, Power BI in a Day. So all 3 of those areas within the Power Platform. And what I want to do is I'll put them up here on YouTube, so they'll always be free. But YouTube's, even in the playlist, they're kind of hard to navigate. So I put together this website called lowcodecorner.com. I only have the one video up there, but all of these videos are also on my channel. What this is it's just a free way to join the course, and I can also structure it like a learning management system, and I can put stuff in the course that will make a nice fluidic series of the videos. Now the videos are all still going to be in YouTube, but you'll be able to go into the class for each of these series and just, watch it in a structured way. It'll kind of keep track of your progress. It'll also make sure that you watch the videos in sequence, and of course you can jump around and skip ahead and do whatever. No cost, absolutely free to you guys. And if you could do me a favor and just, kind of spread the word that this resource is out there. Obviously, like, subscribe the video, because that is the only way it seems to grow the channel. Otherwise, that's why everybody in the world asks for it. So if you don't mind helping me out, that would be helpful as well. Okay, so let's dig into what I wanted to show you guys today. Keeping it really kind of stupid simple so that we don't overly complicate this. I have a table that's in Dataverse. This could be SQL, this could be Excel, this could be a SharePoint list, okay? Today I'm just using Dataverse. It was quick and easy. And as a result of that, I've got 4 custom columns that I want to highlight. So I've got an employee number column, I've got a first name column, I've got a last name column. I also have the PTO balance. Now this table is what I set up to be used with the chatbot that I had created, and as a result of that I didn't want to overly complicate things, so I only have 3 rows of data. Now again, not dealing with the chatbot side of it, but just dealing with the Power Automate side. And I want to talk about a couple of things about how do I get data back. Specifically, if I look over here, let's just pick on Bina Lee. She's employee number 1001. And how do I go ahead and I get that? So this is called Lesson Hard, and this is the way a lot of beginners will try to use Power Automate in order to get what it is that they need. So I'll just walk you through this quickly. So either the chatbot is going to pass in this variable called empno, and or you've got a Microsoft Power Apps Canvas app, and you're calling an action that calls a flow, and then you're passing along through a parameter empno here, right? Okay, so that's where this begins. So now you got the employee number, and what happens is you got a data, you're listing rows in the Dataverse. Essentially, you'd list rows in whatever it is, right? And so you bring all that data back, and now what you do is you have this variable, and it says find employee string. And so what you're going to do is you're going to populate, say, the first name, and you'll have to have another variable for last name, another variable for PTO, or if you're more advanced, then you can use one particular variable, but you would make it of type object and just pack it all inside of a JSON thing, which is actually preferred and better. But anyway, just again, using the assumption, because I'm looking back and thinking back in my mind's eye, when I first started, how did I do things that I look back now and say, man, that was really foolish, or that was really inefficient. And so I just kind of want to share that journey with you so that if you're running into similar stuff, maybe these videos will help get you think of moving your skill set up a notch or 2 or 3 or 4. Okay, so then what you do is now you've got the parameter, you've got the connection, you've got the variable. Now what you're going to do is you're going to iterate or loop through what comes back from this list rows. And you'll throw a condition up there and you'll say, well, where the employee number, and this is coming from the actual field, right, inside of the Dataverse, right? You're saying this is going to actually be, so if you say apply to each, the name says CR758 EMPNO. And if you're not sure how that got there, let's go over here. Let's go to the columns. Now here's my display names, right? First, last, PTO, balance, EMPNO. But this is the schema name, the name in the system, the name behind the scenes, the database, right? And it's got all these CR758 prefixes, underscore, and then the actual, friendly name. So if you're wondering why those are there as well. And if you're super new and super green, let me show you this. So let's go back over to this, and let's go back up here to list rows. This object, okay, when it comes back, it's going to come back essentially as an object, a JSON object. And you have to know a little bit about JSON. Now, if you don't know JSON, I want you to go ahead and take this course here, because this course doesn't get into any coding, doesn't get into any specific technology platform. But one of the things that it does do is I walk you through a series of steps that teaches you JSON. And I teach you JSON in a way that you don't know that you're learning JSON. I kind of sneak it in there at the end and say, hey, guess what? I just taught you JSON and you didn't know it. And the reason for that is because people hear JSON, they know it's a programming thing, and they just freeze up and they're like, I'm not a programmer, I can't do this, but you can do it. And if I were to tell you that I'm teaching you JSON, you might never watch the video. So I kind of sneak it in at the end and say, hey, by the way, I just taught you JSON. Okay, anyway, back to what I'm trying to show you. Again, I keep digressing. So the other challenge when you're first new and starting, when you do this apply each, I'll add another apply each here. So people will come up here to the control area and they'll do an apply to each. And what they'll do is they'll look at this list rows, right? Because that's what's coming back from here. And you've got all of this stuff to choose from. The problem is, if you don't know how this thing is structured, which is this, so the object in JSON, it comes with everything's in JSON, by the way, if you don't know it, it's parent-child type style relationships and things inside of things. If you know what Russian nesting dolls are, it's almost kind of like that. Something's inside of something that's inside of something, or this is a parent, that's a child, and then the child grows up and it has a child, and so now it's the parent, and it, it just keeps going down. So it starts with body as the ultimate parent, right? And then inside of that is a list of values. Now this is of type object, and this is of type array. And you'll know it because there's either indications by these curly braces or the square brackets, which signifies an array. And so under this array, we have a list of items. And so the thing is with the apply to each, it needs a list, and the list is of type array. So the value is essentially what needs to be chosen here, and you see that this is why there's a value there. Okay, so even if you knew what this stuff was and you knew how to use Power Automate, and you're like, Dave, why are you going through this? Even I knew how to use it too, but then it took me a little while after the fact of understanding why it works the way that it works. So I'm hoping this again brings some value and makes the light bulb click on for some of you. And I understand it's hard to make a video that touches something good for everyone, right? But in any event, it starts with the parent, which is an object body, goes to the array, which is the list of items, okay? And then what you got inside of here, if I hover over this, you can see the formula that it uses. It says the formula is output of the object list rows, right? So this is that list of arrays. So the value is saying, give me the output, which is the list of rows of the body / value. So what that is saying is, give me all of this, and then for each of these items. Okay, so that's how you would read that. So now if we collapse it down even further, we have emp now. Now let's look at this. There's an items function that's there. And then there's an apply to each inside of it. And so that name represents the name of the, this apply to each out of thing. So if I were to change this to foo schnickens, right? Foo, right? And now I come down here, see items and then foo. It's smart enough to at least rewrite that. And by the way, sometimes that doesn't always work. So having this understanding is key because your flow will magically break. You won't know why it broke. And sometimes Power Automate will choke and it doesn't change like it's supposed to, which is what you just saw here. That's a great, great feature. And this is why we remain and stay ignorant as long as we do, because it does a lot of the heavy lifting for us. But sometimes it screws up. And if you don't understand how it works, then you get yourself into a real pickle. Now, imagine having to recreate an entire flow with all these steps and all this configuration. That's just absolutely insane, right? So in any event, one of the things I wanted to show you is over here in the documentation for, and this is, by the way, the documentation for Azure Logic Apps. Now, Azure Logic Apps is the same as Power Automate, but a little bit more on steroids, so to speak. It gives you a bunch of extra power. But don't worry about it because everybody's using Power Automate, and unless you specifically know you need to use Azure Logic Apps, don't worry about it. But the documentation, the functionality is the same. So I didn't want you to freak out if you were to read this documentation and say, damn, he showed me this thing about Power Automate, but I can't. I'll put this link in the description box below so you can get to it. But what I want you to focus on is all of these collection. I clicked on collection functions. And so the stuff that I'm going to show you here is first, items. We just talked about that. And then there's these other ones down here called workflow functions. And so here's item, here's items. Then there's the output, trigger output, body, trigger body. Somewhere around here is output. This is also body. It was that function. But go to this documentation and see what these functions do. So when Power Automate does its auto magic, just hover over it and see what code it wrote, and then see those functions that it's using and come over here and learn and cross-reference. This is actually what I did. I was like, I'm always curious. What makes this thing tick? Why does it do what it does? And so that's how I'm able to share this knowledge and information with you. All right, so in any event, assuming you've picked the correct value, which is that middle line object, right? This guy, because it has to be the array, the list. And just a quick sidebar again, you used to be able to run the test flow and you could see the outputs. For some reason, they broke that recently or took that feature away, which is really a pain in the neck because now you have to put what is it? Here, let me add another item here. So if you want to see what the output of list rows is, now you have to do what's called a compose. It used to be you could just click on the output and see it after you ran a test flow, but you come down here to run the compose, and then at that point you got to come over here and do this, item. Actually, no, that's not what I want. You want to put the body in here. Oops, let me get rid of this guy. See, I've already screwed up myself. See how easy it is? If you pick the wrong thing, it auto magically tries to help you with stuff. And so what you want is that body, that parent. You want to see the whole thing, the whole object, right? So you want to pick body. And when you do that, it won't nest that inside of a for each. And now you'll just get the complete and entire body or dump of what's in list row. And you can see the JSON and you can structure it and break it down and visually look at it. Even take it into Visual Studio Code. Another thing you can do is come over here and type in JSON formatter. And this is one of many. Anyway, so you can take the output of the compose and you can pop it in here and it'll auto formulate it slash, what's the word I'm looking for? Format. It'll auto format it essentially for you so you can make sense of it or at least try to understand it as much as possible. Okay. All right. So after yet another digression, anyway, take this away, apply to each two. I don't need this anymore. Delete. Foo is here. All right, so I've gone through that. I'm iterating through, and what I'm using is some logic, and I'm saying does the employee, is it equal to the employee number parameter? That parameter is this guy up here, right? And so it's going to go through. I only have 3 items, right? So it's not that bad. But if you've got thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of rows in the database or in your whatever, this is going to take a while to go through. And here's an advanced tip for you guys. Click on the ellipsis for your for each, and there is some settings that's in here, and you click on some settings, and you see this concurrency control? Turn it on. And now what it'll do is it'll run parallel in memory or in computationally, run parallel versions of this. This is super great. This is an advanced topic. I may even do a separate video to kind of talk about some of the advanced functions out there. But concurrency does a bunch of the same thing in parallel. So if I had tens of thousands of rows in the database, it can run up to 50 batches at the same time. And so it'll go 50, then 100, then 150, as opposed to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is what's going to happen when concurrency is off. Now, this will bite you in the tail if you have previous steps or some steps that need to go on to where there's something going on here in your inside of this apply to each, right? So if, see how I got steps like compose and then I do a string? It's 2-step. So if this step depends on this step, and in this step you're doing something to the item in the project, it could mess you up because you're jumping ahead, and what will happen is you'll get null variables, you'll get data that isn't processed correctly, and sometimes you just can't do concurrency, meaning everything going on in batches of 50 or up to batches of 50. So use that in a very sparingly way. There's documentation. I'm not going to even link to it, but I'll send that off to you for you to go out there and configure. But in any event, this is really an inefficient way of doing it because I have to sift through all the data in the database, okay? But it does work, okay? So life is good, everything runs, right? We'll come back out of here because I did so many changes. I want to make sure I don't wind up getting myself into trouble. And I'll go ahead and I'll click run, and I'm going to put the employee number. Let's come over to here to the database, and this time in the data, instead of using Bina, let's do Alam. And this is 1003, so we'll feed that in 1003, hit run flow, and it's done. Okay, great. We'll go in, we'll look at the run. It went for 2 seconds. Okay, so that's pretty long or pretty significant for only 3 items, 2 seconds. It should have been like, boop, done, right? But nonetheless, the output is exactly the first name of the individual that we were looking for, where their employee number is 1003. So like I said, it's very functional. But if you look at all of the steps that are going on inside of this flow, you know, we expand this all out and keep expanding all of this out, there's just a lot of stuff that's going on. Now this whole thing can be simplified into this same flow that does the same thing in a much easier way. I got these 3 steps and that's it. There's nothing else going on. You're like, well, Dave, how in the heck did you pull all of that off with only these 3? There's no way that this is going to work. Well, I beg to differ. It will work. So let's just do manually. We'll do the same thing. We'll put in the ID of 1003. We'll run the flow, we'll click done, and bam, it's done. It takes longer for the screen to load and refresh than it does for this to happen. So same user. Now if we go into the lesson easy and we see how long it took to run, it should be less than a second, right? 59 milliseconds as opposed to 2 whole seconds. So you can see it is significantly faster. I did get times of 30 milliseconds, 6 milliseconds. And so the point is, this is really an efficient way of doing it. Now you might be saying, well, how did I go ahead and do this? So same thing, I'm capturing some parameters, right? But inside of the list rows, this is where the magic happens. I'm leveraging this to my advantage. I'm going into the advanced options and I'm providing an ODATA query, which all it is the CR758, again, going back to the Dataverse and using the actual schema name. Now, if it's Excel, you'd use that. If it's in SharePoint, you need to make sure that it's the correct name. Now, you can get to SharePoint list names On the back side, in the where you add or manage lists items, you can go in there and see it. A lot of times it'll be up here in the URL. You can see what the name is up there. So SharePoint's a little bit funky and finicky in some cases because it adds, especially if you have spaces in your column names, it does some extra funky stuff. But if you're using SharePoint, you probably already know about that. If not, then just know to be aware. Okay, and so what you're doing is writing these OData queries. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to link to this in the description box below. Let's see if we can find it here. OData, here we go. This is a great blog, right? DYI 365, it's kind of an older blog, but this is essentially every single Power Automate Microsoft query that you're ever going to want to know as a functional consultant. And the key is all of this is these OData filter queries. And it gives you the operator. So if something is equal to or not equal to, right? These are the operator syntax names that you need to use. There's also a contains function that you can use. I'm not going to get into this. Again, I'll link to this in the description box below. But the takeaway here is, and what you need to know, is that just use where the employee number is equal to the number, EQ, not the equal symbol, to the employee number that's passed in. This will and should return either 0 or 1, right? Okay? So now, only thing I'm doing is because this is coming back, still, it's going to, even though there's one item, it's still going to come back with a body, still going to come back with a value, and the item inside of this array bracket, there's only going to be one object. The problem with that is, if I try to reference just that, even though I only have one item, and all I'm going to do is use that compose object to print it to the screen, and this is what most of you would probably think to try to do. You come down here, oh, well, I only have one item. I'll do first name. So where's my first name in the list? I click first name. Oh, bam, it hit the for each thing again. I thought, Dave, you said we didn't have to do that. And that's because I'm leveraging the functions. Again, Power Automate sees that it's an array. It doesn't know there's only one object in the array. It just sees it's a list. And anytime there's a list, Power Automate's going to help you. And it's going to say, let's iterate over the list. And so what we do is we use this first function. Okay, you see it says first, outputs, list row, body value. Okay, and you're like, how in the heck did you even figure to use that syntax out? Okay, so a lot of frustration, a lot of trial and error, but doing a lot of reading on the blogs. I'll put the syntax to this also in the description box below so that you can see how to use the first function. But what's important to understand here, if I go ahead in theory and copy this out, I should be able to go into here, yep, and paste it out. Now, it will try to help you out with the little @ symbol and the curly braces, but this is the actual syntax itself. So if we just go look at the syntax and see what's going on, first, inside of the first function, okay, let's get that out. So we have a first function, and then inside of the first function, I'm using this because this essentially is the list. I want the first item, and it works because there's only one item in there, so it's not like I'm missing any data. I expect it, but I want to avoid that looping for each. So this is why I'm using the expression with the first function. So I got to say, give me the first item out of this list. So what is the list? I want the output of the list rows. And what was list rows? That was this Dataverse connector. And so because of that, I also have to specify, again, body value. So the object name, which was the essentially the connector, or the action name, right? So that's the list row. If I called it foo, I'd have to rename this to foo. And when I say the name, I mean the name here. So if I click this and rename, remember, that's what I'm talking about. So that name has to be that name. And so if I go into here and I put in the appropriate name, again, I'm using the output of that action. And now I use this, it's very common to use this question mark and a curly brace. So if I were doing HTTPS something, 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 blah, blah, blah.com, if you know that you can then use a question mark and then, I don't know, ID equals 123. This right here is what's called a URL parameter. right? And the same concepts exist here in Power Automate. You'll see that we still have the question mark, but this curly brace is just a way of saying, I'm going to provide you a value now, or I'm going to look, I need a parameter, or I want to specify a very particular, in this case, a column name. So out of this output list, I want this column name, but I want you to see the URL parameter was simply the same here as this, right? So this essentially, all this is the question mark, and inside of it, don't forget to use a single quote. And I'm saying is, I want this field or column name. So by providing the list, right? And I come back over here, again, schema name, this is how I'm using the column name. I'm able to essentially now grab the output of this guy. So I can get rid of this funky stuff. And now, after I say the first, give me the first object, right? And so now I have a record, essentially a whole record, but it has all three columns. And I don't want all three columns because I don't want to deal with a record. I just want to deal with a value or an item. So then I specify or tack on question mark and I give it this name. So that's how I'm able to, in this flow, to simply use a compose object to print out the employee's name and avoid that iteration and loop, because I know that I set this up to begin with to only give me one item. That's why this thing is super efficient. That's why this thing runs really quick. And it's very, very helpful when you have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or even just a few hundred rows in your data set or database. It gets it back real quick. So again, wrapping this up, where it comes into play is when you're using this in Chatbot to call this functionality in this Power Automate flow. Or if I'm in Power Apps in a Canvas app and I call an action on a button and I say, I want you to run this flow, you want to make sure the user who's having the user experience outside of Power Automate, they're ignorant. They don't know Power Automate's happening. They don't know it's being used. So you want it to go get the data and come back with the data as quickly as possible. And so just to quickly wrap up, even though I showed you stuff here in Power Automate, if I go back out here, I wanted to show you one thing because it's not here. In these examples, I'll just do a new instant cloud flow. So if I were to choose, by the way, I like the Power Automate V2. So if I was creating a Power Automate flow, I would use this connector, and then I would add my input here. But I do all of my stuff in the Magic. But one of the things you want to look at, I believe it's called return or response. I always get it mixed up. Nope, it's not that. Respond, here it is. Respond to a Power App or a flow. So this is the object that you need to return the object back to your app. So this is where you pass from Power Automate. This is where you provide the parameter and when you're calling the action inside of Power Automate, right? This is where you capture that. And just like you saw that I did over here, I'm capturing it here, but I'm doing this as a manual trigger. But if you were to actually use this in the real world, trying to use it in Power Automate, you have to make sure you have this reply or respond to. The same thing would be happening also if I did for Power Virtual Agent. So if I did, we did the Power Virtual Agent, right? Here's a version 2 of that one. And actually we want to do trigger and a Power Virtual Agent. Yep, we want this one. Now we should be able to, here we go, return values to Power Virtual Agent, okay? So whether I'm using Power Virtual Agent chatbots or I'm using Power Automate, this is where we're going to use it. And there's probably something similar, although I haven't used it yet. There might be something in here for Power BI as well. So anyway, just wanted to show you how to use Power Automate in the most efficient way so that we're not gumming it up using a bunch of iterations as opposed to, you know, going out to the database and saying, give me everything. And then inside of the flow, okay, let's weed and filter this down. That's like really ridiculous and inefficient, and you're going to get complaints from your customers. You're going to get complaint from the end users that are using the app, because it's just going to really be sluggish. So anyway, I hope this video was helpful to you. Please leave a comment in the comment box. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. And that is it for the first video in 2022. The next couple of videos, I believe I'll be starting on the first series, which will be the Power Apps in a Day. That's it for this one. We'll see you in the next. Bye.